Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Yogesh Chavda. I'm the host of Next Frontier in Insights. I'm the founder of Y2S Consulting, and I'm also a faculty member at the University of South Carolina, along with my director role there for the Center for Marketing Solutions. Today, I am thrilled, absolutely thrilled to have Paige Lord join us for our little podcast here today. I actually found Paige through TikTok, believe it or not. And I saw some of her videos and I was completely blown away by the content she was putting out. And I invited her to not only come and do this podcast today, but I also invited her to come and talk to my AI and marketing class, which she graciously did a couple of weeks ago. And it was just an incredible experience. So I know that the conversation we're about to have is going to be just as incredible as well. So, Paige, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Yogesh.
So, Paige, to kind of level set everybody, why don't we first start off with a quick introduction and background about you? So, tell us who you are, what you do, and what's the area in AI that's really got you so fascinated.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So I'm Paige Lord, and I've been in the tech world for almost 15 years. This was not when I was in college, was not a career direction I expected for myself, but have, joined Microsoft right out of college and have really loved being in the tech space, and I think have found a really good fit for myself and my skill set. Something that's super captivated me since the beginning of my journey in technology has been artificial intelligence, and actually even back when I was in high school I was temporarily in the robotics club, which was very interesting, and that's a story in and of itself. But yeah, so I've been kind of in the space and interested in artificial intelligence, and in particular responsible artificial intelligence. What do we do when we have a technology that is so impactful and that is built to mimic humans and what humans do, and how do we build systems and processes and rules to make sure that people are protected as we build this technology and innovate. So I have my undergraduate degree in communication. I have my master's degree in legal studies, where I did my master's thesis on the use of facial recognition technology by law enforcement in the United States and violations of civil liberties.
Mhm.
Published that in in May of 2022, and then 3 months later, it was like almost totally obsolete because technology had changed so fast. Um, and then yeah, I have worked for Microsoft since I started my career in technology since 2013, and I work for GitHub now, which is owned by Microsoft. So I've been with GitHub for about 3 years now, and I'm currently a program manager for our big launches at GitHub. Anytime we launch something out into the world,
Mhm.
I am managing all of the pieces for that. So that's what I'm currently doing. But I also own my own company called Just AI, where I teach people about responsible AI. There's an educational component, and then I also consult for companies and businesses to help them build durable processes.
That's an incredible background, and and like the breadth of things that you're touching is just mind blowing to me personally. So let's talk about responsible AI, right? That's really what what this show is about today. So it might just help level set again with everyone as to what do we mean by responsible AI. Let's start with the basic definitions, and we can then kind of like build our way from there, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, gosh. So when we talk about responsibly, I usually have a visual that goes with this. I think you've
Yeah,
seen my visual, but
yeah.
I usually have a visual that goes with this. But responsible artificial intelligence, people will use that term interchangeably with the term like ethical AI.
Okay.
And when we talk about ethics, we're talking about things like moral philosophy, we're talking about social norms, we're talking about laws, we're talking about regulation and standards, and all of those things in sort of a layered cake.
Yeah.
Responsible AI are really the processes that you put in place in order to bring about the reality of that layered cake. And so
Mhm.
it would be impossible to consider every single component of moral philosophy and build that into your responsible AI strategy. So for
Mhm.
certain companies and certain industries and certain types of technologies, they may pull in certain pieces and bits here and
Mhm.
there. Same thing with social norms and pull all that together, and company policy, all of these different things. The responsible AI is really how we build in systems, processes, principles, guardrails to make sure that the AI we're building or deploying or using is safe and is trustworthy and is transparent. So
That's amazing. So there's a lot you said there, and there's a lot to unpack, right? Maybe if we start, you talked about social norms and everything. So I want to you just like clarify one thing. Do you also include country norms from that perspective? Because every country has its own cultural norms. So
mm.
does that become a variable as well?
I think it can be a variable, and I think that comes down to with each business, that's implementing responsible AI, where they are doing business
Hmm.
and where they're doing business from. So a
Yeah.
lot of US companies will adhere to what would be considered like US social norms. But if your product is very specific, and it or whatever you're putting out there in the world, if it needs the cultural buy-in of whatever market you're in, then you
Hmm.
may consider taking into account those cultural norms as well. I think it's really case specific.
Got it. Got it. So you talked, about ethics. You talked about, morality. These are like
Mhm.
big words at the end of the day, right? So clearly, as you've been, learning and investigating this whole entire landscape, there must have been some challenges that you've come across or seen because of AI. What would those, ethical issues have been that really caught your attention?
I mean, there's so many to choose from,
Yeah.
but one big one that comes up regularly is why should we limit technology? And they have an idea that limiting technology means necessarily limiting innovation, limiting our potential, limiting our ability to achieve. And I don't think that that's true. I think that you can put limits
Hmm.
and also, achieve the things that you want to achieve and achieve them in a reasonable amount of time. And I think that that's one of the big fights that people are having right now. There's another kind of layer to that, which is people talk about um, what they call based AI, which is AI that doesn't have there is no appetite to build limits into that particular artificial intelligence. And so if it's going to be racist, or if it's going to have some other form of bias, or if it's going to
Hmm.
speak in a way that would negatively harm someone's mental health, the idea around that based AI is this idea that to put any limits on it would be a disservice to the technology and a disservice to humanity, even if there are some challenges with safety there and bias there. So I think that's probably one of the biggest, weightiest, most complicated topics, because you're trying to convince people of something. If you're in a debate, you're trying to convince people of something that I'm not sure they'll ever be convinced of. I think they
Right.
they view it as like a natural selection type of thing, where if people don't
Mhm.
understand, then that's just on them. And I believe differently. So
I understand. I get that. So one of the things that might be also happening as a consequence of that is that um, there's probably many voices out there that would be advocating for having regulations put in place for this very exact issue that you're referring to. Um, can you speak a little bit about what are you seeing right now, and where are the winds blowing right now in that sense, if you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. I think in the US,
Mhm.
it's a very anti-regulation energy right now. That doesn't mean that no regulation will come, but I
Mhm.
think that if we were to see, for example, any sort of AI regulation come under the Trump administration, that
Mhm.
it would probably be extremely broad
Right.
and would not be incredibly restrictive.
Mhm.
And I think that it would be sort of the reasoning for that is that they would say, well, for national security reasons and for reasons of growth and for reasons of, this word is used a lot, but dominance in artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
So I think from a US perspective, we're not seeing a lot of regulation at the federal level. I
Mhm.
think that states are coming in now and they're beginning to put together their own patchwork of laws, which is making things really complicated to do business in the United States, because you have to not only pay attention to what's happening on a federal level, but now you have to think about the many different states
Mhm.
that have laws that you have to consider, and the different type of technology and how you take it to market there and all of those things.
Mhm.
In terms of the EU, I think that we're seeing I don't we haven't seen the EU AI Act come into force fully yet. There's still bits and pieces of it that are
Yeah.
coming into force. But people are saying already that they're dealing with some complications of trying to do business in the EU, and the EU has already said at the AI Action Summit in Paris, they said that they're going to work to reduce that red tape.
Mhm.
And so I think that we're also seeing this influence, I think the EU just a little bit, where they still have the EU AI Act. It is still robust. It is still significant. It still moves forward with their one market system, but I think it kind of leaves a little bit of space there where they want to make sure that it's flexible enough to be able to move with sort of the political winds and things that are happening.
I understand. So um, you may have to kind of like give people a bit of a context as to what is the AI Act that you're referring to at the EU level. Do you have us? Can you give like a 30-second version of that, or
Yeah, I think so.
yeah,
The EU AI Act is regulation for all of the nation states in the European Union, and
yeah,
it basically governs how companies can deploy or offer AI services in
hmm,
the EU. And it's basically one set of rules that covers all of those countries. So imagine trying to go go and do business in the EU with all of these countries with different rules.
yeah,
But you have to basically register your product. You different products are given different risk levels, and then there's certain standards that they have to meet related to data privacy, et cetera. And if companies don't meet those standards and still try to do business in the EU,
hmm.
then they will be subject to a really significant fine. So.
Amazing. Yeah, no, that to some degree that it makes a lot of sense because when you talk about privacy, right? I think that's one of
Mhm.
the big unknowns right now about what can you keep your data privacy for you as an individual in the world of AI, even as if for people who are like using large language models like ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, um,
Mhm.
there is still a concern for that, I would imagine.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's a huge concern for it. I think I will say this though, and I think you'll probably agree with me when I say this, but there were data privacy issues way before
Oh yeah,
artificial intelligence, and I
yeah,
think now we're at a place where I tell people if you're worried about your data privacy, then you need to get in the habit of reading the terms and conditions of the products that you're using and understand what happens with your data and
mhm,
understand what happens with the prompts that come out of any AI that you use as well, because there are different varying levels of ownership of
that's right.
every response output from
Mhm.
artificial intelligence as well.
Exactly, and well, there are entire business models that companies like Meta use right now with your data, right? They've monetized it in a way, right? So,
Yep.
uh, and that's been around for over a decade now. So, I think most people are, I would hope, are aware of it. I'm sure they are, but some people feel very comfortable with it, and some people don't. And there's always going to be that delineation. I guess the question comes to with AI, does it change that narrative at all or not, or if it still stays the same? I think that's the big unknown, at least for me right now.
The narrative around privacy with artificial
Yeah,
intelligence.
yeah,
I think it I think it does change it to a degree.
hmm,
Because yeah, privacy, it is a big topic and people are you know, I think people view the AI sort of in the same way, like a chat GPT, the same way they would view like going into Google and their search terms. And like some people are embarrassed by their search history. But
yeah,
now imagine that you go and you're asking a question about something related to medical stuff or whatever it is. And then that information can be out there as well. And then
mhm,
people are adding in tax statements and having AI do so there's just
yeah,
a lot. Like I really think that everybody has to kind of consider what information am I willing to hand over to
mhm,
not just the AI, quote unquote, right, but to these
yeah,
companies because they can leverage it or parse through it or evaluate it, and they are
mhm.
doing that. So
Amazing. Yeah, I had never thought about putting tax statements into ChatGPT, but now that you say it, I'm like, would I do that? I'm probably not sure I would. So
yeah, totally. I feel the same way where I saw that OpenAI came out with a model or they launched during their 12 days of OpenAI in
yeah,
December, which I think was marketing genius. It was a really good campaign they ran. They showed a model that was doing taxes and I was
oh,
like I was really impressed by it because
yeah,
if it had all the information, it could do your taxes faster for you and at a lower cost or whatever. I could see the value in it, but I don't know if you want to hand all your information over to
no
be
kidding,
trained.
right? At
Yeah.
least not on the free platform. Maybe if you have the Teams version or the Pro version, where you at least have a little bit more, well,
Mhm.
at least based on their, terms and conditions, they're saying that you can toggle switches in there to make sure that your data doesn't go into the training set.
Yep.
I would hope that that is the case, and I would hope that nothing goes back into the
Yeah.
large language model at that point.
Yeah, I
So
hope so too.
I get that. I get that. But coming back to the starting of the conversation around ethics, right? I remember in the class you shared a few examples about cases where there was just bad choices made by companies in
Mhm.
terms of the use of AI, and it created like massive reputational damage to those companies. I was hoping you could elaborate on a couple of those examples, so
Mhm.
that from there we can kind of like go into then a conversation around like what are the pitfalls of using AI, and what would be the steps for building a more trust or responsible pathway for AI, basically, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I
Yeah,
mean, yes, of course we can dive into some of the
yeah,
examples.
yeah.
I think one of the examples that was in the spotlight that I try to highlight in almost every presentation I give is the example with Wells Fargo.
Mhm,
They essentially were using artificial intelligence to evaluate whether or not people would qualify for loans. And this was during the historically low interest rates in the 2020 timeframe, and people qualifying for loans to buy houses, and then also for like refinancing and things of that nature.
mhm,
And it's a kind of a longer story about how they got there, but essentially a number of like model citizens who
mhm,
were put sort of on the back burner for a long time, either didn't get a response or got denied
mhm.
the ability to have that refinance or get a loan. And they had great credit scores, they had they were good for the money, they had great jobs, they had and at the end of the day, it was determined that there was a class action lawsuit. It was determined that there were 120,000
Oh,
people, and the thing that they had in common of being other than being rejected for these loans from Wells Fargo was that they were all people of color.
oh,
So that is having conversations about things like bias in the algorithm and bias in the process, and what we talk about in that case is, and of course we don't know the exact specifics of the data that Wells
mhm,
Fargo was using, but if they're using data that was influenced by sort of the racial bias of the time, right, from perhaps the 1960s or the 1950s, when people were intentionally trying to keep families of color from getting houses, or flagging them as high risk, or having, giving them higher interest rates because of the color of their skin, like that data, if that data was used to train this AI, then you're going to continue to get those same results. And so that was one example.
and that's a really good example because and there are parallels with other companies in other areas where people have been screened out for whatever reason, whether it's gender, like the example of Amazon, I think you brought up as well. In the class, it was around hiring practices for tech space, tech roles or whatever, where women were being screened out using the AI,
Mhm.
screeners. I'm wondering, is so you have your data, you're using that as a training set to build your algorithm, right? How do people even start figuring out, is your training data even having any kind of bias or lack of representation,
Mm.
whatever the representation factor may be? Um, is it, do you have any suggestions or any ideas on what would it take to kind of like help solve for those kind of things?
I think what it can come down to is,
Yeah.
first, before you even dive into the data,
Hmm.
first just getting down to the details of the product that you're building or the AI that you're using, the goal that you have with that, and then being willing to take a look at the risks, being willing to stare the risk right in the eyes. And this is where like folks like myself, and there are a number of other of consulting agencies and large companies that have responsible AI consulting teams whose job it is to evaluate the risk and to look at it from different factors, and is there transparency, and can we actually track the decision making of the artificial intelligence,
Hmm.
and evaluating the types of use cases that this might not be beneficial for. And so I think that you have to be willing to sit down and really spend some time in a conference room with a number of people evaluating, who does this stand to help and who
Yeah.
does it stand to hurt, and how
Yeah.
do we figure that out. And then at that point, I think you can say, okay, how old is our data? Do we have any use cases, or have we seen in the past that there's been proof of people making decisions based on race or based on gender or any of these things? And
Yeah.
that's kind of how you get into it.
I understand that because in my former corporate job that I had, I was building up a prediction tool for B2B customers where they were churning out of out of our this particular brand. And I remember we were looking at a training set of data. It never occurred to me, not even once,
Mm.
as we were building up the model. to even consider that, among our, these were like, my words, mom and pop, clinics,
Mhm.
for, audiology. It never occurred to me to say, hey, what is the profile of those clinics? Are they, male, female, ethnicity? Didn't even
Yeah.
consider that as we were taking the training set data, for example. And if there
Yeah.
was a bias there, wouldn't have even known it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So
Definitely, and I think if people don't. I'm not sure that this has been part of the training historically too for people who are, planning the technology and building the technology and so it's like it really is a new muscle, and it really does require
yeah,
a new way of thinking, and so I think people are very quick right now to shame people for not automatically leaning into those questions, but
yeah.
it really is a new muscle for the industry.
A new muscle for the industry, and I think also a new muscle for the individual as well, right?
Mhm.
Whether you're on the marketing side, on the business side, rather, versus the technical side, you almost have to have like a list of audit questions is how I frame it, basically, and saying, what questions should you be even asking as you're designing an AI model,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely, and I have, I mean, based on the case
Mhm.
in that I'm working on with a customer, because building and using and deploying these are all, are different cases, but, I have, I mean, hundreds of different question perspectives for each of these different kinds of cases because we really do have to get into the nitty-gritty details.
Amazing. Now we talked about, like, bias, right? But what about, other areas like misinformation or surveillance? You talked about surveillance at the beginning. I'm very curious to hear about those situations as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, surveillance is a big topic, I think, that isn't probably getting a lot of attention right now, but it did in 2020, it did get a good amount of attention and misuse of facial recognition technology and misidentification of
Mhm.
people. But I do think surveillance is something that is complicated because, um, there are there are certain laws that work to protect us, to protect individuals from,
Mhm.
government overreach or from law enforcement overreach, and
Mhm.
one thing that is not protected is what we call your face print, which are the very specific measurements of your face,
Oh,
and there are other things that are protected. There are, people can't just walk into your home, in without a warrant, that kind of a thing. Like, we have other levels of protection for ourselves and for our person. In some states, it's you people can't take your DNA when they, like, if you were to be arrested, they and fingerprinted, they can't take your, like, a
mhm.
blood sample, but in some cases they can. Those kinds of things, and so we have these levels of protection, but, across the board, like, your face print is not
Oh,
protected, and which means that if there's some kind of like dragnet search that is just collecting information, it can collect your face print and it can add it into a database and it
mm,
can't be held by the government. And then this helps the government to be able to build more accurate facial recognition technology so that in theory, if there's use of CCTV to be able to identify folks, you could be tracked from block to block to block to block just based on your face.
oh,
And that,
wow.
yeah, it's weird.
It's it's scary and crazy at the same time, right?
Mhm.
Because I remember in the UK, CCTV is a big deal. Not as much in the US, but at least in the UK, it definitely is. And I remember this was a concern way back, even in the, at the turn of the century, when CCTV cameras were being
Yeah.
put up. That people were like, oh, is this, going to be a good thing or a bad thing? Now, there were clearly good use cases for that. Especially when there was, acts of terrorism or whatever that was happening. But at the same time, there's this huge potential for misuse as well, I would
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah, and we're even seeing it with, just commercial businesses right now, right?
Yeah.
There's a woman who was attending an event, I think at Madison Square Garden with her daughter and her Girl Scout troop, and the woman was the employee of a law firm that was, the, like, opposing counsel in a lawsuit against Madison Square Garden. She wasn't even on the case. Didn't
Right.
even work in that part of the building or work
Yeah.
on that case, and they used facial recognition technology. They got her ID. She was on, like, a no admittance list, and came out and told her that she had to go away and that she was not allowed to enter any of their establishments.
Oh, wow. Now that I've not heard that one before. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, I think there's a great article on it in the New York Times. And also, if you're interested more in facial recognition technology for anyone, it's I think Kashmir Hill does a really great job reporting on these things. And then Dr. Joy Bullawini, of course, did some of the uh, you know premier research on facial
Mhm.
recognition technology bias. So
And are you finding that these the technology in this space is highly accurate, or is there room for false positives and false negatives?
there's always room for mistakes. There's always room for mistakes, and
Yeah.
sometimes that's for the technology. Sometimes the training data, is it's not maybe it doesn't have great training data. Maybe it's incredibly accurate, but you don't have humans in the loop to be able to check. That's another situation. Is that a woman I think there was a facial recognition. Oh, well, I'll talk about a case I know more about, which is
Yeah.
Robert Williams in Detroit, Michigan, in 2020 or 2019 was arrested
Yeah.
based on a facial recognition match,
Mhm.
and the people who arrested him didn't even compare his face to the photo until he had been in their custody for 36 hours.
Oh my God.
And he filed a lawsuit and he won because they arrested him. It was incredibly traumatic,
Mhm.
and they found that the arrest was racially motivated and they didn't have proper humans in the loop. They misused the technology. So just wild.
That is crazy. So talking about misuse of technology, are there other areas that you've seen where the technology is being misused for these reasons?
Yeah, I think a big one right now that people don't really know how
Mhm.
to deal with is the mis and disinformation that we're seeing with artificial intelligence. I think that there's a possibility in the future that we will kind of create a new term that isn't quite it's not really propaganda, but it's not really like satirical material. I
Mhm.
think that there's something else brewing that we need a new term to be able to describe what's happening because people will create these parody videos or what have
Mhm.
you with AI or things that are meant to be satire, and
Yeah.
then they get commandeered. This recently happened where somebody created a video using AI of it showed Donald Trump laying on a beach in Gaza,
Mhm.
and they that was taken by the president and reposted. And
Yes.
so it all of a sudden turned from something that was meant to be satirical and somewhat critical and
Mhm.
turned into something that the Trump camp was able to use for
Mhm.
um, you know highlighting their agenda. So I think that
Yeah.
it becomes there's a fine line.
Yeah. In fact, I think I saw that video that you're referring to. I think there was another one that also came out after the meeting in the Oval Office between President Zelensky and Trump as well,
Mhm.
where I won't go into the details, but let's say it wasn't very um, positive for anybody who's involved in that situation. But
Yeah.
the video kind of like shows that play out in a very negative manner, and to me, I kind of felt like you're right. It's a total misuse of the technology, and for the uninformed or the ones who weren't aware of what actually transpired, it could be very misleading.
Yeah. Yeah, because you hear on social media, "Wow, I
Yeah,
can't believe that happened in the Oval Office," and of course, they all did get into, it was very tense and there it
yeah,
wasn't a great show, I think, in general for the
yeah,
United States, and certainly, strange to see that play out in the Oval Office, but then to see a video of it coming to fisticuffs, essentially, of them fighting, which
yeah,
was the
exactly.
AI generated video, and
Yeah.
that's wild, and people believed it.
Yeah, exactly. I literally had friends on WhatsApp who were thinking that was actually what transpired. And I was like,
Mhm.
no, guys, that's all AI generated kind of thing. So
Yeah.
it's creating a new level. I agree with you. There's no term for it today, and I think maybe we need to have a term for that. I don't think disinformation cuts it, quite frankly
Yeah.
speaking. You know.
Yeah, yeah, and that's tough because and I think for folks out there too, if
Yeah.
people aren't familiar with the difference between the disinformation and the misinformation, the disinformation is when somebody intentionally shares something that's false or misleading or untrue.
Yeah.
And then the misinformation is when somebody unknowingly picks that up and says, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened," and then they
Exactly.
they continue that spread, and it happens because of social media, it's so easy for people to hit the share button without having to do their due diligence. And so I think everybody just has to have a heightened critical evaluation mode where they are really willing to pause and say, is this real? Is this true? Do I trust this source?
Yeah, the trust part, as well as I think there was, at least for a while, some of these platforms had some sort of filters that would provide you some sort of clarity that says this is disinformation, or
Mhm.
it's not 100% accurate or whatever. But those filters are going away by the sounds of it, right?
Yeah, they're already on their way out. And this started with Meta.
Hmm.
Meta really kicked off the year with a bunch of hard news for a lot of people.
Yeah,
And they're going more to a community notes model. So they want people to be the ones to say, this is true, this is untrue. And I think that the challenge with that is that um, there are so many people who are making claims about what is true and what is untrue without actually having the facts. And so
right.
we've really lost that in a lot of ways, I think, where people think that because they feel a certain way or because they think that it may have happened this way, that that automatically makes it true.
Hmm.
Oh,
Yeah. So yeah, this is going to be and I think what you're really pointing out is that this is going to create a massive pain point for everybody. And as a consequence of that, there will have to be some form of intervention that will have to happen, either
yeah.
by industry or by government or both, at the end of the day, right?
I don't I think that I think this is a tricky topic. Like I would love to say that I think, okay, the
Yeah,
government could come in and put, limits on certain things or what have you,
yeah,
um, but I think it's such a fine line, especially in the United States when we talk about things like free speech.
yeah. True. That's very
And
true.
so it's complicated and it's hard for me to weigh in on a little bit because
Yeah.
how do you draw that line in a way that doesn't overreach?
No, I get that, and I'm by no means am I advocating,
Yeah.
limitation of free speech or anything like that. I'm just thinking through the dilemma that's coming,
Yeah.
or is already here in front of us. And I think, as we think about, especially young people who don't have that experience or that wisdom just yet, who are
Mm.
seeing some of these things, are they being misled, or people who are uninformed of the situation? There are too many. There's too much downside risk by the looks of it. It
Yeah.
seems like,
I think so. I think you're right about that. And what I really think it's going to come down to is people.
Mm,
There was this huge thing when I kind of missed it. It was after I had already had a cell phone, but I got a cell phone when I think I was 14 years old.
mhm.
And that was like very cool at the time, by the way. Not everybody had one. And so I had a cell phone and then we didn't really know the risks, I guess is what I would say. And we didn't have a smartphone. So it's not like I was watching videos. I was just texting my friends, the
Yeah.
T9 texting.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I think my parents, I sort of missed that window of like sharing the dangers of that technology, but they did share the dangers of things like MySpace. Like I was on MySpace and they were like, this seems weird. You're talking to these people, they're strangers. I think it's really the same thing where parents are going to have to evolve to have conversations with their kids. Kids are going to have to evolve to have conversations with their parents. I talk to my mom every time there's a new scam. I text my mom and dad. Every
Yeah.
time I see one that is targeting people, I just say, I just want to put them on notice that
Mhm.
somebody might call pretending to be the sheriff. You know what I mean? And so I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
it's the same thing with mis and disinformation that we're just going to have to get in the habit of having a
yeah.
standard ourselves and helping other people create a standard.
It's funny you say that, because about the cell phone thing, because you can see my white hair. I grew up in a generation before even yours, where we didn't even have cell phones. Like our cool thing was having scientific calculators, believe it or not,
Yeah.
in middle school. But when I think about my son, when he was in middle school, his school actually had invited this guy to come in and talk to the kids about social media and smartphones and things like that.
Mm,
To the 12 and 13-year-olds at the time. And this guy is from California. He basically would educate the kids and about the use and misuse of social media. And he actually has a newsletter for the parents where he has like a green, yellow, red traffic light system for any new platform that shows up that the kids might be interested in, so that he points out that, okay, for let's say
yeah.
Instagram, this is what you can do and this is what you should not do, and these are things you just have to keep an eye out on your kid, kind of thing, right? And I remember my wife and I were having conversations about that. We found it incredibly useful because you know we were on Facebook, but we weren't necessarily on Instagram or any of the other platforms like Snapchat or whatever. And that was our way of getting educated through his newsletter
Mm.
at the time to learn about the use and misuse of those situations, kind of thing. So thankfully there are people out there who are doing this kind of service, but is it broad, is it well known? I doubt it, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
totally. And I think that that is such an important thing. A lot of these people, by the way, who are building out these newsletters and sharing these perspectives, these people are not being paid to do that. They are doing it out of their knowledge and the kindness of their hearts. And so I think every time I see there are a number on Substack of accounts that are focused on parenting and technology and kids
mhm,
and technology, and I always appreciate the perspective that they're giving because it's not about just keeping kids protected forever from anything that could hurt them, but giving them the tools to be able to evaluate when they might be interacting with something like an AI agent that
yeah.
is, a character or something from a
Mhm,
movie that may
mhm.
actually be taking them down a path they wouldn't want to go down.
That's so true. That's so true. In fact, one of my classes right now is working on a project where you can actually, superimpose your face onto other
Mhm,
like characters, if you want to call it that. It's a fun thing, it's meant to be fun. It's there's a social aspect to it and things like that. That's kind of like the pathway the founder is trying to go down, which makes a lot of sense.
mhm,
But we've had conversations with him, and as a class around, are there misuse are there use cases where there would be misuse of that, and what do we do to make sure that doesn't actually happen, kind of
mhm.
thing. And he's very well aware of it, and he's trying to build it into his platform. But it's so easy for that to happen. That's the scary part
Yeah,
in my
it
mind.
totally is. It's totally easy for it to happen. It's easy for anybody to be whether it's someone calling you and using an AI voice or whether it's, an
Yeah.
app or whether you think you're vulnerable or you don't think you're vulnerable, like, it's out there, so
So we've talked about all the misuse cases and all the disinformation cases and the bias situations that we can face. Let's kind of like segue a little bit now to say, okay, that's the landscape that could happen or is already happening.
Mhm.
Now, what do we do about it,
Yeah.
right? So, what would be your headline for what do we do, kind of thing?
Well, I think it starts with what we were just talking about, which is educating people.
Mm,
Digital literacy, AI literacy, these are no longer, like ifs. Like, I might as well pick that up along the way. Like, it's really a requirement, especially if you're working in any kind of job or even if socially if you're using technology, like, these are requirements. And I
mm,
sort of liken it to, you remember when everybody would write their resume and they'd be like, I know how to use Microsoft Word and
yeah,
Microsoft Excel. And now it's just like, unless you are an Excel wizard, you
mhm,
don't put that on your resume because it's assumed that in general you understand how to use it if you are working in a technical job or working in a role where you have a computer.
yeah,
So I think that, it would be great to get to that place where we just assume that everybody needs a base level digital literacy and AI literacy lesson,
mhm,
and that we don't operate under the assumption that everybody just automatically knows.
mm,
Um, that's a danger spot I think that we get into a little bit when we try to figure out, like, how do we address this? Because there's a lot of people with the attitude like, I know that this is fake. I can tell that this is fake. And
mhm.
because I can, that means everyone can. And that's not always true.
Right.
So I think that is the first step to addressing it is digital and AI literacy.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and so if you're a leader in an organization, right, you consult with a lot of companies as well. So as you said, with your own company. So when you're coming in and saying, okay, digital, you need to have digital literacy, but as leaders who are trying to adopt AI into their organizations, are there certain kinds of questions or areas that they should be prioritizing upfront and kind of like addressing them upfront? How do you go about doing that part of that conversation, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I think so. You're trying to get AI into your organization,
Hmm.
and some companies are going to say that they want a responsible AI component, and some companies are going to say that they don't need that yet,
Hmm.
which I think puts the company at risk. But just going back to the actual implementing the AI, if I was an organization leader implementing artificial intelligence and I'm leading people,
Yeah.
I would lead with transparency. And I would explain to them, these are the technologies that we have chosen to bring in to the company. this is why we've chosen to bring these in, and showing that you not only have carefully selected the technology, but that you have also thought through the use case. Because a lot of people are just, let's just build AI or let's get AI in the door, or whatever it is. And
Yeah.
they're doing that because of investor pressure, because of shareholder pressure, because they have to have something to report at earnings, whatever it is. And they don't really think through how this could have a benefit or be impactful. And then they're surprised when they don't have great adoption numbers.
Yeah.
So I think that the key there is, being really transparent off the top, making sure that you're getting feedback from the people who are actually using the technology and understanding why they like it and why they don't
Mhm.
like it. I think also reassuring people that there's not some big mass layoff that's happening, that this tool is meant to help them. It's meant to, for whatever the task is. If it's a developer tool, meant to kind of, take on some of those tasks that, are perhaps things that you don't enjoy quite as much, right? So that you can
Yeah.
move up the value chain in terms of the things that you're delivering.
Yeah, but I hear you, and I completely agree with what you're saying. But I think there's also that counter narrative that's out there that, I think there was in the press not too long ago that 40% of coding jobs are disappearing in some
Mhm.
organization because of AI being implemented
Yeah.
in that organization, right? So those headlines is what's, I think, driving that
Mhm.
fear factor among employees, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think it is a very super valid fear. And so when I
Yeah,
mentioned that just a minute ago, saying like,
yeah,
oh, there's not going to be mass layoffs, that's a decision the company has to make. The company
right,
has to make a
yeah,
decision ahead of time before they share out this. And that really, I guess, is up to the company whether they're going to, replace humans with AI tools. Or if they're going to, if they see a job that AI could be well suited for, that they would commit to moving a person to a different part of an organization so that they
yeah,
could continue to work there. These are really important conversations that they would need to have. And so whatever the answer is to that question,
yeah, yeah,
that needs to also be transparent to a degree. If
yeah.
you do think like there's one company, I can't remember the name, but Klarna, I think that's the company, but they had said that they were laying off a huge number of their workforce because they were able to use AI and the customer support, they were laying them off. And that did not go over very well for them, but they didn't provide any sort of, educational anything for anybody. So it's not like
Right.
people left with some kind of direction in their job or where they could go, and so I think
Yeah.
that was handled poorly.
Yeah, that's a great example because I'm with you on that as well. Because the technology is developed is advancing very rapidly. We all know that, right? And things that we couldn't do today, we can probably do tomorrow, kind of thing.
Mm,
But that doesn't mean that we, just in blanket statements that like you're seeing with that example that you just gave, that you say we're going to lay off all these people and AI is going to do all that work for you. You still need that human oversight
mhm,
to make sure that the right experience is being given to your customers, the work streams are working effectively and smoothly, etc. You still need people to do all
yeah,
that stuff as well. The profile of the job may change, which is,
yeah,
I think, the big point that you were making. But we're not there yet, so we
mhm,
have to kind of like keep, at least for me, I keep on reminding myself to say that, hey, there is security here. We just have to kind of make sure that we stay on top of the technology part of it to give us that and retain that security part as well, if you know what I mean.
yeah, I think so. And I also think that the AI era, certainly there are some things that are beyond our control. I think we are definitely seeing some layoffs related to artificial
Yeah,
intelligence. I
yeah,
also have seen people who have been able to adopt the technology and really figure out how it works
hmm,
and use it in a way that has just catapulted them in their career as well, and has made them into a leader in their company in a variety of ways because they were the one who figured it out, and now they can bring other people along with them. And
hmm,
the thing that makes those individuals, I think, a little bit unique as well is that their expertise
hmm,
is still necessary. Like, from a development perspective, if we're talking about AI assisted coding, you still have to know. I mean, my husband's a developer, and I'll look at his screen, and I could look at a bit of code and be like, I couldn't even tell him if this was right or wrong, like,
yes,
right, contextually. But he
yeah,
has to have that knowledge to be able to say, "Oh man, this result it gave me wasn't correct, or it
right,
missed this thing here." So
yeah,
the expertise is still needed, and I think it'll be interesting to see how things level out as the economy hopefully picks back up and as things change in terms of inflation and as,
Yeah.
more jobs are available.
I'm with you. Look, I'm playing around right now with a lot of this technology as well, right? Literally this past weekend, I started playing around with Zapier and Make.com, to start building my own agent-based models kind of thing.
Cool.
And oh my gosh, and I was testing both at the same time because I don't know the platforms well enough. I don't know the minutia of how to like fix arrays and things like that. So I was struggling, but there was one thing on Zapier that really could like captured my attention, where every time the flow wouldn't work, it would give me the error, and then when there was a button that came up that says, "Do you want to fix it?" I'm like, "Yes, I want to get it fixed." Instead of telling me what to go fix, it was doing it for me.
That's
And I was
cool.
like, oh my gosh, this is such a big time saver. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah,
You know?
it went into its agentic mode, and it just started running through the process. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And I'm thinking to myself, like, that if Zapier is offering that today, right? Make is not offering that today. They have a beta version of an AI tool which kind of like
Mhm.
gives you a generic description of what the problem could be, but it's not telling me exactly how to go fix the problem,
Mhm.
right? Or do it for me, basically. But if Zapier's done this, I'm just sitting there thinking like that's going to become the standard for everybody at some point. And if others don't do it, that's going to be a problem for them in
Yeah, and
terms of usage, you know?
I think we're seeing it too in agents. We're seeing it in, and I'm close to this launch, right? Because I work for GitHub, but we saw it with the VS Code launch of agent mode last month, and then,
Yeah.
Klein and Rue Code and these extensions as well. They're doing that, where they're reviewing things and then finding out what needs to happen next and just running through the motions. So,
Amazing, but
yeah.
that's the beauty of everything that's going on, But uh, I want to kind of close this. So you've given us some good, thoughts in terms of how we go about, setting up, and how leaders should be thinking about this space. I'm kind of like curious also in terms of, as you look, further out,
Mm.
and like you pointed out, like the issue of the terminology around some of the disinformation misinformation thing, are there other areas that you're seeing in the horizon that could become either problematic or are opportunities that would solve some of the challenges that we have right now? What are you seeing?
So I think one of the challenges one thing that I think is gonna be very complicated in the next couple of years
Hmm.
is that, first of all, the conversation around, how AI is impacting the environment.
Mhm.
And part of the reason why that's a complicated conversation to have, especially in the United States right now, is because I think that there are a lot of people who, because the US pulled out of the Paris climate agreement, there are a lot of people who feel like, the United States is not in any way committed to trying to positively impact the environment, and that a lot of people in the US and leaders of AI companies, especially, I think that the benefits of unrestricted AI growth right now will lead us to better solutions for the environment down the road. But
Mhm.
they are making these statements with exactly 0 proof points.
Mhm.
And so it's really a wish. It's really a wish. And
Mhm.
so I think that that is something that's very complicated. I want to be really careful about how I phrase that too, because I understand that there are a lot of different factors at play when we talk about these types of things.
Yeah.
But we really do not want to get into a situation where we haven't thought through how we can protect the planet for future generations. It's not just protecting trees for trees' sake, it's
Yeah.
protecting the planet for future generations.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's going to be a really complicated topic in the future, that I think that we're going to be looking at. I also think that there's going to be some continued pushback against sort of the same voices get to lead the conversation when it comes to AI, especially in the US right now. And I
Mhm.
think that there's going to be some pushback there. In terms of innovation, I think that we are already seeing some beautiful innovation as well, right? We're seeing models that are identifying different synthetic materials that could be created. Microsoft came out with their MatterGen model, which
Mhm.
identifies those things, and then they were actually able to build it. Scientists in a lab were actually able to take the information they received from this model and then be able to build it. So that can help long term with things like self healing materials. So I think that we're seeing some benefit, but a lot of it's wishful thinking right now, and we shouldn't swap our future for
Mhm.
like a promise that has no proof points behind it.
Right, right. No, that's a great point. And you know, I admittedly I'm not as well versed in that space. Of the the energy level, the energy needed to drive all these data centers.
Mhm.
I hear about the data farms that are being built out, and that's there's a massive these are massive investments that are happening in Texas, and I think even in Minnesota. I heard recently that that's
Mhm.
happening right now. But um, I just wonder that with the pace of change that's happening, and I think even sorry, just to add another example, I think even with the launch of 4.5
Mm.
on for ChatGPT 4.5, they were saying that there's a massive data suck for that too, right?
Yeah. I was gonna ask you this question too, so I'm
Yeah,
curious if you'd be willing to share your perspective on this,
yeah,
but so 4.5, yes, huge, like, energy suck on that. I
yeah.
mean, and 4.5 was weird for me because I felt like they launched it, and basically the best they could tell us was that it's a more natural conversation, which I think is the last thing people had on the list for what they wanted from AI. So it's like, why are we spending all this money? But a
Mm,
lot of people have been saying that GPT 4.5 is the
mm,
beginning of the burst of the AI bubble. And I think that that's something that impacts everybody. If that bubble
mm,
begins to burst, that is going to impact the economy and it is going to be, compounded by different policies and stuff. And I was curious from your perspective if
yeah.
you think that that is true.
I don't know. So I'm conflicted. I'll be honest with you. I'll tell you the part. I'm skeptical, like you are, and I get where you're coming from. But on the flip side of it, the emotion, the conversational style and the intent behind what's being said, actually is an opportunity in one way, which is that if you're able to pick that up, if the models are able to pick that up, now they're able to actually analyze emotion.
Mm,
And if it's able to analyze emotion, you are now able to then start having ChatGPT be able to do something beyond just the rational side of the thinking process. It's also now starting to help you design the emotional side of the thinking process as well. In one way, it's an opportunity, especially when you think about it from a branding marketing world perspective,
mm.
right? But I want to flip back to the skeptical side again for a second. All my friends in market research, especially all my friends in the qualitative industry, it's going to freak them out
Yeah.
because they're hanging their hats on saying that, okay, AI can do all this other stuff, but it cannot go measure or understand
Mm.
human emotion. But if now 4.5 can, that's going to put into jeopardy all these people who do focus group moderations and qualitative research and all that kind of stuff. It's a disruption.
I
It's
think from like a privacy and risk perspective, a question we could ask ourselves is if
Mm,
we have a model and if
yeah,
we say this model can now understand emotion and understand sentiment,
yeah,
that then is that just a hop, skip, and a jump to we use this facial recognition technology and we were able to determine that you were angry when you walked into the grocery store. And now we're using that as proof for why you caused this thing or you stole this thing or you so it's just a hop, skip, and a jump when
mhm,
we say that a
mhm,
model is definitively able to evaluate emotion,
yeah,
so much of our emotion is unsaid. I mean, it's
mhm,
unspoken.
yeah,
So, I don't know, I don't even know if we want that is the thing. Like, industry disruption aside, do
mhm.
we really want AI? Do we really wanna put AI in charge of evaluating our emotions?
Well, that movie, Minority Report. I don't know if you ever saw that movie or not, right? But that was the whole premise of the movie,
Yep,
actually. So
and we're not that far from it. Like,
we're not far from it.
we're not
Exactly.
far from it, so,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And that's so on one side it can scare people, right? And people can feel like, oh my gosh, this is like a massive invasion, into my privacy and things like
Mm,
that. And I understand that. On the flip side of it, if it prevents, other things from happening,
mm,
right? Could that be a good thing, right? So I think about this, frequently, especially when you have children, like you worry about your kids being in school, and you hear about all these terrible things that happen with school shootings. Tools like this, could that stop it? Could that prevent it? I don't know, but if it can, that's a big deal.
Yeah, I've been looking at the time. I'm like, we've only got 5 more minutes on this
I know.
live, like, but
Yeah,
yeah, I think that's where we have to have those bigger conversations because,
exactly.
if we're using AI, I think using AI as an investigative tool is different than using AI as a tool that is evidence, like evidentiary
Mm,
support or
yeah,
hard and fast evidence. So to come in
exactly.
and say, "We captured their face and they looked angry." I mean, they could have slammed their finger in the car door. That
Exactly.
doesn't mean that they committed a crime,
Yep.
you know?
Yep. The
Yeah,
context matters a lot in that case, is what
yeah,
you're saying, really,
I
right?
think
So,
so. Yeah.
Paige, I have two short questions to ask you, so we'll stay within our time.
Okay.
The first question I'm going to ask you, as we've talked about a lot of things here, right? And you've touched on some really, heavy topics at the end of the day. So, bringing it back to reality for everyone, what would be your single biggest piece of advice to businesses and to individuals when it comes to navigating this entire space? What would be that one piece of advice you'd give people?
Yeah, one thing I would say is that if there's some part of AI as a business leader that you've been staying away from, like you
Mm,
just are not, you're like kind of have a weird reaction to it, I would
yeah.
say that that's probably a sign that you need to kind of dive in and get a better understanding of it because these things are going to keep coming in waves. And so the best thing you can do as a business leader is understand the models, understand the benchmarking, understand the use cases, and you don't have to become an expert in all of it, but
Mhm.
generally having an understanding of all of these different things I think is going to be really beneficial, and I think it will set you apart from a
Mhm.
lot of competitors.
Yeah.
And then while you're doing that, make sure you think about how you would implement something responsibly when it comes to artificial intelligence. It
Mhm.
seems complicated, but it's not really complicated. It's messy. It's messy, but it's not hard to do.
Mhm. No, it isn't. But I think there's still room there for people like you, as experts in the field, to give that kind of coaching and guidance to people, because not everybody knows even what questions to ask at
Mm,
this point in time, right?
yeah.
So, do you see? So, this is my last question to you. Do you see an opportunity for people to have a career path in this space, perhaps?
I think so. Yeah, and I don't know if it will be forever. But I think for right now, we're at this point where we don't quite have technology that can fully do the job of helping you to understand exactly what needs to be true
Hmm.
to build out a responsible AI system and processes within your company.
Yeah.
Is we don't quite have the technology that does that, and we need people with these program management skills and the ability to be able to look across a lot of complicated things and distill it down into very simplified, actionable steps.
Yeah.
And so I think that there is room right now for that in the market, and I think the people who gain that expertise now will be able to really drive impact moving forward. And we're seeing an uptick in the market right now where businesses are interested in welcoming people in to help them build something that's long lasting, that's durable, and that will at the end of the day protect them from legal harms and reputational harms and de-risk in their organization. So
Amazing, Paige. I can't thank you enough for dedicating 1 hour of your life to talk to me and to our audience today about this topic. Um, I believe this is like a masterclass on what we should be
mm,
thinking about and how we should be approaching this entire area of responsible AI. So I can't thank you enough for being here today.
mm.
Um, you
Thank you
know,
for having me. I really do appreciate it. It's been
Oh,
great.
you're very welcome. And for everybody on, watching us, have this conversation today. Today, obviously, you can find us here on LinkedIn. You can also hear us on Spotify. I'll be uploading this entire conversation on Spotify by tomorrow, so you can access it. If you want to connect with Paige, she's obviously on LinkedIn, and I would highly encourage you all to follow her on LinkedIn and TikTok and watch her videos. They're absolutely amazing. So, Paige,
Oh,
thank you again. So.
thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a good day.
You as well. So let me just say thank you to everybody, and we'll be back on March 21st. We're going to have Manisha Goyal on. She's just done her TEDx talk in the UK about AI, and I'm going to be having her come in and talk to us about her TEDx talk. So thank you everyone for listening today.